It is time for Roll for Reading. This book I found at a museum in a library behind some glass, and all I had seen was the binding, and I was like, oh my gosh, how absolutely beautiful. I have a huge interest in gardening. My cats and work life say otherwise, but we do have a few items that did make it to the overwintering process, and some houseplants that are still hanging on despite our cat's efforts to destroy them. So this is Gardens Ancient and Modern. It's a nonfiction book about various historical gardening ideology. So we can read the chapters out of order, which works perfectly for this concept. If you would like to read along or just go ahead and read ahead, or wait till we have everything out and kind of like audiobook it with us, I'll leave a link in the description to where you can buy physical copies, or where you can view on an e-reader or print out copies, because this work is in the public domain. It is that old. So I am excited to be reading Gardens Ancient and Modern with you all every Friday. We're going to call it Flora Friday. And after that, we'll have to find something else, because we will have this Friday, and I'm going to read the prologue so we can kind of see what our style is. It's going to be very academia, historical type vibes, I will say that. But this will only take us 11 Fridays, so after that I am going to have to find another item for us to check out for Flora Fridays. So let's hop into our prologue. There's a dedication. It is to Margaret and Margaret, our prologue. So we'll check that out. Prologue. I should not perhaps venture now for the first time to set adrift upon the flowing tide of garden literature, old and new, a volume such as this. But when the first edition of The Praise of Gardens made its appearance 14 years ago, it might almost have claimed to be a pioneer in the revival of old garden books. Imperfect as it was in execution, it sought to bring together a series of prose passages giving an historical survey of their delightful subject, to show lovers of gardens and literature alike that the title of the volume was meant in the good old wide-embracing sense of Elizabethan days, when to praise a subject was also to appraise and appreciate it. If that aim more nearly hits the mark in the present edition, by means of the many passages omitted and added, which 14 years further familiarity with the sources have suggested, the collection may better deserve the eulogy, a scholarly little book, passed upon its infancy in all too indulgent and encouraging conversation by my friend and master, Walter Pater. At least I trust that the unity of its subject, garden art or design, will in some degree fuse and harmonize the variety of voices joining the choir of praise. It is vain to expect that everyone will be satisfied with the choice, and that all will find their favorite authors quoted or their favorite gardens mentioned. Many will wonder why poetry is so poorly represented, perhaps being that one poetry is richer in flowers than in gardens. And it is with gardens as a whole, rather than their contents, that this book is busy. Besides, in a garden, everyone is his or her own poet. Moreover, are there not verse anthologies enough and to spare? Of the gaps in my garden hedges I am only too conscious, marveling how I can have overlooked such obvious and striking claims. Where are the garland and plant lore of Athenaeus and Theophrastus, and the garden points of old Thomas Tusser? Where are bulwarks of defense, Andrew Board's Dietary of Health, and Bishop Grotesta's Book of Husbandry? Where are the lines of the poet King James I of Scotland on Windsor Garden? And why is Gerard performed to his predecessor, Dr. William Turner? Why find we no mentions of Raleigh's gardens at Beddington or at Sherborne, described by Pope? Where are Ralph Austin and Sir Hugh Platt, John de Garland, 1081, John Gardiner, 1440, John Ray, John Rose, John Tradescant, John Reed, author of the Scots Gardener, 1683, the earliest Scotch garden book, John Dalrymple? Are all gardeners Johns? James Justice and Gibson's Gardens about London, 1691? Well, some are to be found in the epilogue. Some are perhaps too exclusively technical, and the absence of the others can only be explained by the short word space. And now, to the real purpose of this prologue, that of most prologues, thanks. Where all is borrowed, it seems invidious to make distinctions in gratitude, and so, to the great men of the past, who unconsciously lend their names and writings to the following pages, I offer my deepest and most reverent thanks. To the living writers and their publishers, who in this edition or the last have allowed me to quote from their works, I repeat my sense of their kindness and my obligation. In regard to the art contributions, first and foremost to Mr. George S. L. Good, R.I., for his liberality in allowing me to make a selection from many of his beautiful and famous drawings, I am most sincerely grateful. To Mrs. William Graham, I am indebted for permission to copy the lovely watercolor of The Lady in the Garden by Frederick Walker, which makes so poetical a frontispiece, and Walker's own comment
strikes an admirable keynote to the book. The garden is the perfection of peace and loveliness. To Miss Ella Sykes, the author of Through Persia on a Side Saddle, I owe my thanks for leave to use The Garden of Finn at Kashan, and for the 6th photogravure in a Scotch walled garden. I am indebted to the photographic skills of my brother-in-law, Mr. A. G. Campbell, as well as for the view of the inn at Nara, Japan, taken upon his travels. To Professor Brinkmann, director of the Arts and Crafts Museum at Hamburg, I am under deep obligation for the artistic and altruistic impulse which prompted him to place at my disposal and send to England a large case of rare engravings selected by himself at a sacrifice of great labor and time, from the fine and perhaps unique historical collection of garden prints which he has formed for the museum and exhibited at the great gardening expedition in Hamburg, 1897. I must further thank Mrs. W. A. Willis for her photograph of the pond garden at Hampton Court, and Mr. George Clawson, A.R.A., for procuring me the photograph of the Pompeian garden. To the 3 chief histories of gardening in England. The general one prefixed to J. C. Loudon's Encyclopedia of Gardening, 1834, a masterly and exhaustive treatise which only requires to be brought down to date. George W. Johnson's History of English Gardening, 1829, which also strongly merits the honor of a 2nd edition, and our 3rd honor, Alicia M. Hess' History of Gardening in England, 1895. My obligations are nonetheless great that it is impossible to express them every time they are incurred. Finally, to my old friend Francis Henry Cripps Day, for general and generous assistance given me unstintingly in revising the book, as well as for the labor of preparing the index. Non solum verborum sed amiciatia. I am heartily grateful. And now a last word of egoistic reverie. Where may one indulge in daydreams, if not a garden? My dream is of a library in a garden, in the very center of the garden, away from house or cottage, but united to it by a pleached alley or pergola of vines or roses, an octagonal book tower like Montaigne's rises upon arches, forming an arbor of scented shade. Between the bookshelves, windows at every angle, as in Pliny's villa library, opening upon a broad gallery supported by pillars of fair carpenter's work, around which cluster flowering creepers, follow the course of the sun in its play upon the landscape. Last stage of all, a glass dome gives gaze upon the stars by night and the clouds by day. Les nuages qui passent là-bas, les merveilles noches. And in this garden of books, sui et amicorum would pass the colored days and the white nights, not in quite blank forgetfulness, but in continuous dreaming, only half veiled by sleep. A. Forbes Sieveking, 12 Seymour Street, Portman Square, November 1899.
Alright, so here we have our table of contents. So we will see how many chapters there are, so we know which dice to get. Okay, so we have 9 full chapters and then an epilogue for 10. So we will need our D10, and we will go over to our little rolling station to see what chapter we're going to read for next week. Right, here is our rolling station. So we have our blank page, so we'll clearly be able to see which this D10 lands on, and we're gonna get our little pirate stein thing. I use this for pirate Ren Fair and carry it around. I love it. I'll shake it up. 8. Looky there. So we are gonna read chapter 8 first next week. So let's take a peek at what that is called. Chapter 8. Alright. Garden design as a liberal or fine art. Alright, that sounds fantastic. I hope you'll join us on the rest of the campaign, and hopefully my barding skills are, okay. They're definitely, level 0, but, we will continue getting XP. I hope you continue our little campaign, even though it's only in all 11 shots. But comment, give us a like, subscribe so you can ring that bell for notifications, and always stay up to date on our latest campaign. Thanks for joining us on Roll for Reading. I'm Corobell Longwart. This has been a wonderful campaign, but I bid you adieu.